Okay, so a very warm welcome to this BioWednesday webinar. I'm delighted on behalf of One Nucleus to welcome you to our session. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. If you're not part of the panel, if you could please remain muted and keep your cameras off, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. So the focus of today's session is going to be around what are the key elements that we need to enable life science clusters to successfully scale. And also we're looking at the diversity of those components as well. So we have a brilliant panel lined up, and Tony of One Nucleus himself is going to be moderating our discussion as well. So really delighted. So it's just up to me to do a few of the logistics before we kick off. So for this session, I'm delighted that we actually have some delegates who are at an in-person hub in Norwich Research Park, and we're streaming to them. So we've got an in-person audience, and we've also got the online audience as well. And because of that, the Q&A is going to be done slightly differently, and we're going to be utilizing Slido to take your questions. So what I'm going to do now is just bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen. So I hope everyone can see that. So for this session, if you would like to submit a Q&A, a question, and we really encourage you to make the most out of the session, then please go to, using your mobile device, www.slido.com. And then if you enter the code 741847, that will take you to a screen where you can submit your question. And actually it's quite smart because you can choose to upvote questions. So if you see someone else has popped a question into the Slido platform and you think, oh, that's similar to what I want to know, or it's a really good question, then you can simply vote, and that will help me at the end of the session to select those ones which you want to have answered most. So as I said, yeah, I really encourage you to submit your questions and use this as an opportunity to engage in the discussion. So I hope everyone has had a chance to note that down. So 741847. And just to highlight, we are also recording the session. So as with other One Nucleus BioWednesdays and our innovation seminars, some of these are part of our on-demand content and our conference content as well. So if you go to the One Nucleus YouTube channel, you can see a really excellent selection of content that we've been building up since the start of the pandemic, and we plan to continue growing that to enable our network to catch up on these conversations and also to share the learnings as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, and just to reiterate, if you're not part of the panel, if you could kindly remain muted with camera off, that's much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to hand to Tony, who's the moderator for our discussion today. And I'm sure all of the panelists will be able to give an introduction to themselves as well. So I'm going to disappear into the background and hand the floor to you, Tony. Many thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia, and welcome everyone. So for me, I'm Tony Jones. I'm Chief Executive of One Nucleus, as Alicia pointed out to. And I guess over the last 25 years, I've been involved in running a network, whether it was in London or now across London and Cambridge, and looking at why clusters work or don't work, why people talk to each other or why some don't, and whether we'd like them to or whether we wouldn't like them to, and all the challenges that go with that. And it's a very human behavior thing a lot of the time. Business happens because people work together. But I guess I've always been intrigued about, as you see the sector in life sciences developing and other sectors converging in, so there's much more technology and data science, material science coming in, then the audience I look at when I see the life science cluster is probably broader now than it's ever been. It's kind of spreading all the time, but is it spreading geographically as a result of now doing different things, or are the existing clusters changing, and what makes that scale up possible? And I'm delighted for the people who've accepted to be on the panel, actually, because it gives us such a broad spectrum across all the elements really that you need. It's about science and innovation and leaders there. It's about great policy making and regional development to make sure it works and the government get the message. It's about whether you can raise money. It's about the real estate and the diversity of facility that keeps evolving as R&D changes. The companies need different sorts of homes, I guess. So I'm glad we've got such a panel. I won't introduce or name them now because I'm going to come around and ask them to introduce themselves because I'm sure they'll be far better at it than I can do for them. And then the audience will get the sense of that spectrum and, in fact, geographically where we're based between Europe, UK and US. So without that, I'm going to ask each one, if I may now, and ask you to introduce yourselves and set that scene. But maybe at the end of that introduction, just pick out something that you feel is a key part of the dynamic of where you're based, of why your local ecosystem works. So if I could start perhaps with Emma.
You caught me on the hop there, Tony, trying to find the mute button. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Emma Skeets. I'm Senior Vice President of Sales and Service at Abcam, which is, we're dual listed now in London and New York. Our second listing occurred just last year, mid-pandemic, so I think that was an interesting exercise for all involved. I'm a chemist by training, but I've been in the business of science my entire career. So I joined the university licensing office at Oxford, creating startup companies, licensing technology to established companies, helping university academics obtain translational research funding on the path towards creating technologies that would go to clinic and go to market. And joined Abcam only in November of last year from another local firm based here in Cambridge, so Isogenica, which is a contract research organization focused on single domain antibody therapeutics. So great to be here. Look forward to the panel.
Emma, I'll come to Horst.
I thought ladies first. Anyway, thank you for the invitation. My name is Horst Doppler. I'm the managing director of the Munich biotech cluster, an emerging cluster. When you compare it to Cambridge, we always say Cambridge is our role model, our benchmark, and we try to get closer, but that's difficult, yeah. At least we know we cannot come up with Cambridge, Massachusetts, yeah, but Cambridge, UK would be a possibility. I'm a trained biochemist, had a position for several years as a university professor at the Department of Chemistry at the University of Munich, excuse me, and founded 2 biotech companies, and then was successful in a national competition, which was a so-called bioregio competition, where Munich won one of the 3 prizes. And so I was looking for somebody who will run this bioregion. The word cluster didn't exist by then yet in Germany. And eventually, after 2 glasses of excellent Bordeaux wine, I was convinced that I should do the job because I had been a civil servant for several years. And that's what the chairman of the board said, well, you have lived without risk for a long time. So in the past years, we've built up the cluster, and I think we did pretty well. Also during the pandemic, we had some very interesting and good results. And I think that the secret of the cluster, of the success of the cluster, is probably, of course, I'm biased here, it's the cooperation with the academic scene. So we have 2 strong universities in Munich, and all the companies we have here come from out of the universities, out of the Max Planck Institute, out of the Helmholtz Center. And also the collaborations exist, and I think that's our role model that we have. Keep that going, and we always ask also for funding for these joint research projects between academia and industry. We can just talk about that later. Thank you.
Thanks, Horst. But we'll go across the other side of the Atlantic now, and we'll come to Colleen.
Hey everybody, Colleen OConnor. I'm our Senior Vice President for Leasing for Biomed Realty, life science real estate company. I manage leasing and asset management efforts for about 6 million square feet, primarily based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I've got just about 5 million square feet here. And then we've got about 1 million square feet over in Cambridge, UK, focused at the Greta Park campus and also Biomed at Babraham campus. We've also recently made a number of investments into the UK life sciences sector. And we're actually planning to almost double our real estate footprint in the UK, Cambridge, UK market. So very much believe in the fundamentals of that region. We do have a local director, Matt Smith, who some of you may know, who works boots on the ground on our efforts there in partnership with Orestes, who's another one of our Biomed colleagues that works in that market. But Biomed Realty is really focused on establishing a real estate presence for life science and technology users in the core submarkets. I think Cambridge, Massachusetts has definitely been our largest platform to date, but we're also invested in San Francisco, San Diego, Cambridge, UK, and Seattle, and generally looking always all across Europe, especially places like Germany, to see if there may be growth opportunities in those regions. So really do a lot of analysis and work around what makes these life sciences clusters successful and where our real estate investments are best focused, taking into account some of the demand drivers from the life science user base.
Rosemary.
Well, I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Rosemary Truman. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Ignite Social Impact, which is the first crowd equity platform to democratize impact investing based in the United States. And I'm also the founder and CEO of the Center for Advanced Innovation, where we are a startup catalyst. We launched about 350 startups, and we launched the companies around inventions sitting on the shelf. So the backdrop is that in the United States, we spend about $140 to $160 billion in R&D. And so we've partnered with about 150 institutions across the US to identify the most commercially viable inventions that have the most social impact, and then basically take the invention, match it with the team and the capital. So it's a trifecta. My background is in investment banking, starting at Goldman Sachs. And after that, I went into strategy consulting. And last thing I did in corporate America was I launched and led IBM's innovation strategy practice globally. So growth strategy is really my specialty. Getting back to your question, Tony, about like the key dynamic that we've seen that allows scale to happen. It's really about the team capabilities, the disciplines of the capabilities in the team, from the point of view of the science disciplines, as well as business and legal and other disciplines on the team. We also have identified a model where we do what's called a fluid intelligence test, because the entire team can be formed in such a way that it could scale, and the institutions can scale as well. Then another component for the team, of course, is the partnerships that they develop. So depending upon the stage of the organization, you know, these dynamics need to change a bit. But so I guess I'll hand it over to Ted.
Thank you, Rosemary. Hi, everyone. I'm Tedagne. I'm president of the Communication Strategy Group, which is a small consultancy headquartered just outside of Boston. And we're kind of decentralized. Our consultants are all around the country. I was with a very large public relations firm in New York, Gerson Marsteller. I was based primarily in New York, but also in London. And my background was corporate financial. And in the mid-'80s, I was recruited up here to Boston with a startup company that we eventually sold. But I suddenly realized that the excitement and the action was in the emerging markets. And I started this consulting practice. Initially, we would take anything that walked, crawled, or was even conscious. Our first client was an artificial intelligence company, but we very soon got into the life sciences. And at the time, some of our clients were so small, they consisted of a scientist and a rat. He didn't even own the rat, he had borrowed it. So, but we tend to work with early stage companies, and that's why it's so great to be partnered with Tony and One Nucleus, because there's some really exciting companies. We see it all the time. The stuff that's coming out of the universities there in the UK is just amazing science. And what we do with some of them is help them come here, either bi-coastal, or sometimes they end up transferring the entire operation here with having a UK sub. So we've got kind of an interesting perspective on it. But one of the things that we started talking about were bioclusters, and this is an exciting area, and there are some wonderful bioclusters around the world. I mean, Horst with Munich, I mean, that's just a wonderful picture to be seen. Bioclusters are really ecosystems when you look at them, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, but I'm delighted to be here. This is going to be great fun, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, everyone. I'm conscious, I guess, of, we're having this discussion based here in the UK. It's been a day when our government has published what it called this levelling up white paper, which is about how do we spread the wealth that we see in Cambridge and Oxford and London across the whole of the UK. And that questions, well, how do you create clusters in other parts of the country, perhaps as in the context here? But I guess, I'm a bit old school in the fact, and I think it's a contact sport and when it comes to innovation, but I think it's quite that simple. I guess, Emma, you sort of recently joined Academic, but you come from a young company through that and then involved with companies. In COVID has shown, the pandemic has shown us that collaboration has gone on, business deals have happened, and people have been remote, and wonderful things have happened in the sector. So are clusters still relevant? What does a cluster add? Is a physical cluster?
Well, I mean, I can speak from the experience of being chief executive of two smaller venture-backed companies prior to joining Abcam, and the value of a cluster for that kind of organization is that, when you have perhaps relatively smaller amounts of money at hand, having your customers on the doorstep just presents so many opportunities for you. It isn't just a question of being able to go out and talk with companies that you might want to sell to or partner with, but also there's so many opportunities for learning right on your doorstep, because you have the benefit of events like this and great people coming together that you can just readily network with. There are professional advisors in the local community who make it a very much part of their business to be spotting the up and coming talent, because they want to be looking after those companies from an early stage, so that when those companies become big and do well and raise lots of money and IPO, that they're the preferred advisors for those organizations. So that presents lots of opportunities to get free advice, which is tremendously valuable. So so many reasons why it's valuable to be in a cluster. And the talent piece is obviously, like, when you're a small company as well, it can be much more difficult for you to be a magnet for talent. So if you are in a community that is already a magnet for smart, engaged people who want to work in your sector, that's huge. And equally, like you mentioned, the piece about it being much more multidisciplinary in our sector now, and the fact of whether you're looking for data or analytics capability or something else, if you're in a cluster and that cluster is attracting those types of people, again, the opportunities for that kind of cross-functional working piece are just, they're much more available to you.
And Rosemary, your model of kind of identifying great innovation and then you put the teams around it and you get the funding. But do you still find you need to bring those teams physically together in one of these key locations as well? Rosemary, you with us?
I'm so sorry. I missed the beginning part of your question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying, because you sort of find the innovation, then you sort of crowdsource the team in a sense to put around it and bring the skills together. But do you still feel that you would rather put that team physically in one of these sort of established clusters, an ecosystem, or can they remain virtual?
So we have had, our experience has been that out of the 350 companies we've launched, about 75% of them are more virtual. And some of the most successful ones were actually on a few different continents. What we found to be the most important thing is the diversity, building on what Emma said, the diversity of the team in terms of their skill sets, technology skills, scientific skills, legal skills, business skills. all of those components together. And then, as I mentioned before, the fluid intelligence test gives us a clue as well. It lets us know about how much of a troublemaker is someone, how open is someone, and the best thing for a startup company to grow is the openness score of all the players, and the team leader needs to be a little bit of a troublemaker as well. But it's the diversity of also their fluid intelligence and also how quickly they can learn. So this test that we administer, it's like basically two parts to it. One is giving us some behavioral attributes, but also showing us how quickly they can learn, because it goes through a myriad of different tests. We also did a project for the Kauffman Foundation some time ago, about 9 years ago, actually. And the title was "Why Do Startups Fail?" and what creates the platform for growth for them. So we found that there are 30 variables that should be present within the team. And so as we build these teams, we work with the teams to kind of put mentors on them and partners with them and advisors with them. We look at these different attributes. And the biggest problem within startups usually is the churn factor. So that causes the lack of resiliency, essentially. So we look at that as well. So another component, I think, which is critical, is to grow. Organizations need an architecture of capital in different ways. So the architecture is, there's of course non-dilutive funding and grants and things of that nature. Then there's dilutive funding. So we offer our startups those two possibilities, and then we started to build the scaffolding, which is the crowd equity platform. Given in the United States, the SEC and FINRA have changed the regulations so that companies can come onto the platform and raise up to $5 million, and there are less restrictions on how the money is provided. So I think the other component is the capital diversity.
Tony, I'd like to add one point, if I may. I think one of the secondary benefits of misfortune of the COVID pandemic is that it did teach us a new dynamic. We're learning new ways of working together. It doesn't mean that we're going total virtual. I mean, we still have to have nice warm bodies in those labs, but I think a lot of young companies are finding it goes back to that quality of life issue, which is one of the things that goes into forming a biocluster, that today's modern employee, they want a little more to their own life. We think back, Tony, to when you and I started in the Stone Age, that you've got 2 weeks holiday, and if you stayed there for 5 years, you might get 3, and if you were there for 10, they might give you 4, right? But now the young employees coming in right off the bat, they want 4 weeks holiday, and they want a signing bonus, and they want all of these things. It's the whole dynamic has changed, but I think that this learning how to work both virtually and on site, it's different. I like it. I think it's going to work well. It changes from the real estate standpoint. It does change things around a little bit, as Colleen will address. But I'm excited about what's going on. I think we're going to have a great time.
I think that's kind of an interesting point, really, because I know the Outcam headquarters in Cambridge is such a modern-looking building compared to when I first came into the sector, and buildings didn't look like that on the outside or inside. But Colleen, how does Biomed see that evolution of the types of space? I mean, Ted alluded to the way people want to work and the environments they want to be in, and I guess creating the right environment is part of enabling innovation in that sense. But how do you see that from a developer's point of view? How do you deal with that evolution?
Yeah, I think when we're interacting with a lot of these real estate decision makers for these life science companies, the number one thing that we hear from them is that they're really focused on hiring and keeping the best and the brightest talent. Because if you think about the life science business model for many of these companies, the most important thing is really hitting that next research milestone. And to do that, you have to have the best talent. And so oftentimes we find that the decision makers are really focused on having an incredible facility that people really want to be part of and work. And being in a location that can attract and retain that best and brightest talent, because otherwise, you can't. It's the most important thing to your business model, and you really, really can't sacrifice on that front. And we hear from a lot of these real estate decision makers that in terms of their total cost of their operation, the real estate line item is actually fairly small. I mean, the most expensive thing is hiring the scientific talent. And so that's really where we see people focus. I think we've seen throughout our time during the last few years during the pandemic is most of our life science companies have actually been using their facilities because you can't really do a lab experiment from home. And so I actually read an interesting article just the other day that someone locally in Cambridge, Massachusetts posted. A news reporter basically sat outside of a few of the tech buildings and sat outside of some of the life science buildings for the day and actually counted the number of employees walking in each of the buildings to see how much it's differed through the height of the pandemic. And one of the major tech companies here, the person counted 29 people that went in. And for a life science building that's actually smaller from a footprint perspective, they counted 293 employees that walked in. So you could see there's a very big difference between, some of the tech workers being able to do work from home and be really, really productive in a virtual environment. But some of those life science scientists have to be in those facilities performing the research. And I think we've always taken the business model that we really believe in the power of a cluster. That's why, when we were first acquired by Blackstone back in 2016, we used to be across a number of different markets. We really kind of changed the business strategy to focus solely in on clusters because we do believe in that element that innovation happens in proximity, not in isolation. And so when you have these clusters, it creates a more rewarding environment for the scientific base, and it helps lead to those discoveries at a more rapid pace. And our investment in Cambridge, UK has really proven that. We've got about 900,000 square feet. I realize I'm saying square feet instead of square meters sitting here in the States, but we've essentially decided to double the size of the platform and have a path to deliver another 900,000 square feet in that market. And it's really because we believe in the power of the cluster. And when we're often looking at new regions, we're trying to find areas where we can scale and help create part of that ecosystem so that we can deliver that experience for the life science tenant base.
Can I ask, Colleen, are you seeing any changes in the way that people want to use the space that they're letting from you guys?
Yes, we definitely are. I think even before the pandemic, we realized that programs and scientific research is changing so rapidly that it's not like a tenant goes ahead and builds out a space and they use that space in the same way for the 10 years of their lease term. It's actually changing incredibly rapidly. And as a developer, we have forced ourselves to really do a deep dive and learn best practices and how to design spaces that are highly flexible and modular, because what you design today does not work a year from now. And these life science companies need the ability to change out different research functions and to be able to do it in a short period of time without incurring a significant cost to alter a facility. And so we are laser focused on that. Anytime we're delivering a new building, we've got a cross-functional team, operations, facilities, development, leasing, legal, everybody kind of sitting in a room and brainstorming, how can we develop something that is highly, highly flexible, that works for our user base, because we know no 2 days are the same in the life science industry, and the pace at which it's moving has accelerated exponentially. And I think it's going to continue to do that. And so we as life science developers are always thinking, how do we actually keep up with the scientists, because they're moving at an incredibly rapid pace.
Well, I guess that's whether the science is evolving or the science is moving from research to clinic and the space needs to be used differently, or you have the hybrid working situation and you want to use the in-office space to encourage different types of collaboration. And so taking down some walls and creating kind of collaboration spaces is a good opportunity. So yeah.
I could add into that. Children's National just recently established a campus on the prior Walter Reed property, which is a very huge property in downtown DC. And J Labs is part of that effort, and the hospitals is in there. So you have the people who are developing the technology in the ways that they can apply the technology in close proximity. And they gutted everything in there, and it's, I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. There's lots of natural light, there's lots of plants, there's, you know, it feels very homey. And that for the where you have lunch is an enormous, big, long table with some fancy coffee makers and so on and so forth, and refrigerators, and, you know, of course they want people to stay there. So that there's also the architecture, which I'm sure that Colleen could speak about more, with creating more community amongst different kinds of people and co-locating different kinds of companies as well.
And yeah, the sort of part of me wonders, you know, the sort of economic development returns that governments see from successful clusters and the return on that investment. There's not often people get a chance to kind of create that from the ground up, and it sort of that. But Horst, you really did, as you said, you sort of bid for this funding to bring a cluster more to the fore and help it evolve in Munich. And yeah. I've always thought, I mean, conversations with you is just some of the growing pains that you went through for that. But how have you seen that journey?
Well, you know, I was there at the beginning when our cluster work started more than 25 years ago. So we now at BioM, we are celebrating 25 years in this year. And we went through all kinds of waves. We also planned, or there was a construction which we called incubator, but it never became an incubator. It became just a company hotel, yeah, with 20,000 square meters. That's very nice. But it should be open more to new startup companies. But of course, the managing director of that prefers to have stable companies in there, so the risk is much lower in this case. Eventually, we were now last year successful. We will get funding for running an incubator for the next 5 years. So we got some 10 million. Our prime minister still has to sign that, but everything, the papers are written and everything should work. And I think that's very important because especially the startup teams, the founders really want to be together. And we found that also out because we are organizing these so-called boot camps. When you have these boot camps, you bring in experts from all sides. But these teams learn most when they talk to each other and when they talk to other companies. Yeah, so you don't have to be a consultant or something, but just this everyday experience is extremely important. No, I think lab space, office space is very important. And when you talked about that, I was thinking of one company, a very successful company, and perhaps they are so successful because they have the best space you can imagine. It's an old loft of a cigarette company. We call it the how is it called? Morris. This is tobacco company.
Morris.
Yeah, they were left because they are not so welcome. They took over that. So it's a huge hall and they have everything in there. And I think that's the best thing. So you have the place for the ping pong plate, the table tennis plate. You have a net for the basketball that you can throw in. So this really creates atmosphere. And in this way, the company grew within a few years to 170 people. They have 7 subsidiaries worldwide. They are really excellent with a rather simple technology. But I think there is the space is so important because there are dynamics involved which I do not understand, but obviously it has to happen. Yeah, people love to be there. They have parties in their buildings. And when you mentioned in the beginning that, well, people tend to love to have more holidays or something like this. Yeah, I think that's fine. But the quality shows if you take these holidays or don't take them. These new startups that we have there, they have in Germany, we have 6 weeks, yeah? But usually they don't take more than 3. That's what they just need to recover. And that is also a sign of the dynamics of the quality of the company. Yeah? So if people say, this is not work anymore, it's just an occupation, yeah? And it's what I love to do, and I even get some money paid for that. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that you have to create. That's also, let's say, the secret of many companies, that the management has to create such an atmosphere that people love to work, that they come in. Even in the pandemic, I can say we have next to us a Max Planck Institute with a huge parking lot, and we have the parking lot of this innovation center. The parking lot of the innovation center was always filled, whereas the parking lot at the Max Planck was always empty. Yeah? Now the doctoral students are coming back, but the department directors still stay at home. So you also see there is a lot of enthusiasm in the companies, especially since now in the pandemic, they were really asked for. They could show that they have potential, that they can solve some problems. And unfortunately, BioNTech is not in Munich, but in Mainz. We even have companies who sort of save the world, yeah, which makes us proud.
Tony, you asked about government returns to investment in clusters. And I think if you think about, if I give you the perspective for ABCAM and you think about government returns in a broad way, I mean, we have facilities in many places across the world. So Cambridge, UK is our headquarters. We're based in Waltham, just outside of Boston in Massachusetts. We have big sites, 2 big sites in China. And so as you think about the kind of government returns across that footprint of facilities that we have, all of the time we're making choices about where we're going to be able to find talent. So we're interested in how governments are investing in education, all the way from, this isn't just university and tertiary education. This is, high school. We're interested in apprentices and technical qualifications as well. So the breadth of investment across the education piece is important. Real estate clearly is a factor. We just posted our interim results for the year, 315 million revenue. That was a 22% constant currency increase on the year prior, and that's despite the pandemic. So we are interested in having flexible real estate, which Colleen has spoken to. We all of the time are putting up walls, tearing down walls, changing the use of space. We need to have facilities that enable us to do that relatively rapidly. And of course, the investment piece that Rosemary touched on. We need to be in locations where, we haven't been raising investment from the capital markets because we are self-sufficient and have been financing our own growth organically. But nonetheless, we want shareholders to join us on this journey. And part of the reason why we elected to go for a dual listing in the United States is because, we see opportunities to partner with shareholders who are excited about the growth journey we're on. So all of the time we're making decisions that are going to affect the returns to government of investment choices they're making across a range of factors.
Which in itself, I think it kind of, Horst, you touched upon, these people don't take their holidays because they're enthusiastic and they're loving what they do. And I guess as you scale an organization, it's harder to keep that energy at the same level. And we've heard about how talent is what everybody wants, is that they're seeking that talent at the right time and creating the environment for that. But thinking about that holiday thing, and one of the questions that has come in is like, are we moving to a point where people will expect more flexibility, more annual leave? That's sort of how they're treated as an employee. Has the power shifted? Well, the influence shifted, power sounds a bit hard. The influence shifted to the talent now control more of that. So the pressure's on the companies to make them feel more valued. I don't know, Ted, you alluded at the start of it, you're lucky if you've got a week's holiday, and if you work long enough, you might go through. But I just wonder is that a direction you think is happening everywhere, or is it, I'm seeing?
I think it's happened, Tony.
It probably has happened, I guess.
Yeah, it's not happening, it's happened. And, most of it is kind of good common sense about, you keep talent if you treat people reasonably, and the and that has many factors that I think the really interesting and important part of the discussion with employees now is that isn't purely about compensation. You know, this is very definitely about work-life balance. It is about how the environment that employees are asked to work in. It's about the culture that management teams are creating. It's about people seeing that there is genuine fairness and diversity and equity of opportunity in the workplace. It's about understanding that, you know, where issues are observed, that those are dealt with in companies in a mature way, and companies feel supported by that. So, you know, I know part of this conversation today absolutely is around the kind of D&I and equality piece. And obviously there's been a lot of new legislation in many parts of the world, and, you know, positively so. And companies have to work pretty hard. And, you know, I'm sure others around the table here will, you know, be in a similar boat to Abcam, really working hard to kind of understand what their people want and need to feel that they can show up and bring their whole selves to work and do a great job every day.
I think that's the sort of the part of it, isn't it? It is about how that environment, that culture in the organisation motivates, and that's fine. I'm doing. Sorry, Rosemary, you were going to.
Oh no! I was just going to put a point on what Emily mentioned. Was we're hiring, and we in 3 days the jobs are kind of similar between us, our little company, and this very, very large organization. We had 80 applicants in 3 days, and they had 7 applicants in 3 days. So it's you know, we're very flexible. We don't care where people live. But what's very interesting was that one of the applicants, they are working remotely for an organization, a well-known impact-oriented investment organization in the U.S. And what was clear is that we sent them the offer, and they were just trying to negotiate for more money with their current employer. So there, and probably more flexibility in terms of their ability to work remotely, their ability to have more days off, things of that nature. For sure, there's pressure on companies to identify ways to retain talent. And just also to build on what Emily mentioned, in the US, all the publicly traded companies now have to have a woman on the board. And it's created an interesting dynamic.
I have a question regarding employee mobility, Tony. And Emma, maybe you can address this. Do you think that working, you know, these employees that are working in the clusters, they get together with their mates and they have a couple of beers and they said, yeah, I'm really not happy with what's going on. Well, you're not happy there, come on over to our shop. You know, it's walk down the street and go to the other place. I think there's a certain, you know, agnostic approach with some of these employees. It's not the old time employee loyalty, is it? It's, you know, take care of me and I'll be a good employee. But if I can get a better deal somewhere else, I may take it. What do you think, Emma? Is that a fair statement?
Well, I mean, you know, I've done a lot of business in Boston, and people would always joke that you know, the revolving door never stops, right? And with employment at will in the United States, you know, the change can be very, very swift, even for senior executives. So I think what it means is that companies have a relatively short period of time to, at least once the member of the team is onboarded, to get it right. So you have to be getting it right before these people have joined. You know, your brand has to demonstrate that you are committed to, you know, paying people fairly, looking after them well, treating them fairly once they're in the workplace, giving people opportunities for personal growth, you know, being compassionate. You know, people sometimes are taking holiday, frankly, because they have caring responsibilities, or they're looking, you know, after elderly parents, or, you know, so there are all manner of reasons why people need flexibility, rather than just for, you know, going on a nice holiday. And I think good employers are recognizing this, but yeah, you've got to get it right probably before members of the team join.
I think that's, you know, it's a phrase that's often misquoted into "if we build it, they will come." It wasn't actually the phrase, but it was that with that same thing. You know, we hear where governments want to create clusters in new places or there's new entrants to the markets. Yeah, what I'm hearing, it's about that hotbed of coming together with these ecosystems that are already there, and these great companies and opportunities for development and growth and so forth within them. So I guess, Colleen, you mentioned that sort of with Biomed, you take that cluster approach of that's where you build, is where these hubs are. And I can see why that would be less risky if you're looking for the next tenant than putting it hundreds of miles away. But in equal sense, are we missing, one of the questions that's come in is, are we missing great talent from people who aren't near those clusters or engaged in the clusters? So by the clusters being dominant, are there people that could be great in our sector, but we don't attract them? I don't know whether who wants to take that one. Horst? What's that like?
If you're living in a nice city, I think it's not a problem. So Munich has been very attractive over all these years, and it has been attractive, or perhaps too attractive for many other smaller clusters around Munich. So we have also, let's say, some incubating facilities at the other university cities. But once the company has been started, then they come and move to Munich, because there is also another very important point. You have to go where the money is. So you always say money is international, sure, yeah. But of course, there you can meet the investors easily. Well, these days it doesn't play such a big role because you have to meet them anyhow online. Yeah, but this is a very strong argument. So there's a big airport nearby, and then they fly in and they fly out, and that has to be there. Yeah, so I don't think, let's say, those people that really are interested in something, especially this type of people that we want to have in the companies, they will come. That was also the case when I was teaching and doing research at the universities. We got people from all over the world, yeah, who were interested in that topic. Yeah, if you have interesting companies, interesting points, interesting items, then they will come. On the other hand, we are in a lucky situation due to the universities we have and the Max Planck and Helmholtz and so on. So that's, I think, probably the biggest advantage that we have. Coming back to the major question about space, everybody who wants to develop something is more than welcome. The only problem is we do not lack investors. We really lack the area where we could build something on. Yeah, so that's always big fights, and I do not know how that is in other places. But the other day they wanted to do an extension of one of the companies there. It was a green lawn where you had, once in a while there was a sheep running around. So there were big protests of the people around there, and it was not allowed to build an extension there. So the company will have to move elsewhere. But they say, well, we don't care. Yeah. So these are the problems that we are facing, that although the society has realized how important this technology sector, life sciences, biotechnology is, they do not accept completely, let's say, the companies, the business, that you can make business and things like that. I was a little bit disappointed. Yeah, I would have thought that the society is more thankful that test kits were provided, yeah, and all the systems were brought in, that companies are developing now therapies, and that we have these vaccines available. No. There's a big question, why do they want to have money for the vaccines? That should be distributed for free and best all over the world. So we have to work with the society and explain to them much better that this is also a business. Yeah, with pharma, I think it's accepted that they have to make money because they are listed companies, they have to increase the value. But with the biotech scene, it's not so much the case. People put them into the academic corner and say, why do they have to make money? Yeah? Why do they have to make a business? Can they not provide that? They haven't understood the business. Maybe it's better in the UK and the United States, but here in Germany, it's still a little bit difficult though.
Yeah, I mean, we have challenges around Cambridge, certainly here in the UK, with people want to protect whether it's green belt around the city, and it gets too congested, and it's almost like we'd like Cambridge ideas to change the world but not change Cambridge. And there's a lot to be said for that. It's a successful ecosystem, and why would you not want to keep it successful? Do you want to risk it not being successful? But I think you will get that pushback sometimes. But I guess on the flip side, will the pandemic have changed where future clusters will be? Is there now more of an acceptance, if you like, that life sciences has got this really valuable role that other people weren't aware of, and there's more acceptance locally of it?
I think it depends. It depends on what your time frame there is, Tony, because I think the reasons why, the pandemic feels like it's been going on for a long time, but let's remind ourselves that it's been 2 years. And, the clusters that we are very successful now have been very enduring in their success. And they typically also are clustered around, big cities, which their history of some of the cities around which the clusters are located are very long as well. So, on your point about are we missing people, I sort of rather suppose that Colleen, your organization, chooses real estate locations that are typically relatively wealthy, talent-rich cities, and by virtue of that also relatively high housing costs.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I worry about people, getting on the career ladder and trying to, especially from less fortunate homes where there isn't the support of family members to afford for you to move and make a start in a location like that. That can be a real challenge, and I think many of the people, we focus a lot on the top end of the talent spectrum in our sector, but there's absolutely a requirement for us to bring in, apprentices and train people through all different levels and stages of careers, and I think it's probably quite challenging at the start of that journey for many people if they don't have financial support.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I guess leading on from that, and I'm sort of going to throw this one, I guess, to Rosemary to some degree in the first instance. That bringing new talent in, obviously companies need to scale and they need to keep refilling that talent pipeline. Some of the companies you work with, and or if the others are working with them or housing them in Colleen's case, or maybe doing this at that camp. But one of the questions that's come in is whether for students to get into the system, if I get in through the door and get started, do your companies offer kind of lots of placements or lab shadowing and experience gaining? Because I think often we hear from students it's very hard to get in if you're not in that ecosystem already. I mean, is that something you encourage as part of this whole inclusivity thing?
Absolutely. So out of the 350 companies we've launched, 60% are co-founded by women and 70% are co-founded by minorities. And the 250 of the companies are in life sciences. So there's 100 that are in deep tech, like software, hardware, mechanical, electrical, communication sensors. So it's a stack. So these are relatively complex companies. We lower the barrier to entry for talent to come into our challenge. And that's why they're usually not in the same location. I mean, one of our best companies was in 3 continents at the beginning. And just to get back to the specific question you mentioned, then I wanted to build on a couple of things that others mentioned. The way we connect the talent to the inventions is we launch a global challenge. So one of our most recent ones was with the Walton family. And what they wanted to do is put a spotlight on Northwest Arkansas, which is a very small town. And there's not a cluster there, it's just Walmart. Walmart and Tyson's Food. So there's 2 companies that employ most people. So we launched 25 companies in that ecosystem. And during the course of the challenge, we also are running an accelerator. And the accelerator is free, it's virtual, it's like a mini MBA, 40 classes, 12 company building exercises. So part of the company building exercises will connect the companies with non-dilutive capital because they pitch at different competitions. And usually they raise between $20,000 to $600,000 during the course of the challenge. And at the end of the challenge, they'll, on average, a cohort will raise about $9 million. And our whole model is virtual. So the investor forum at the end is virtual. But what we did, for example, with it was called the Scale Challenge, Supply Chain Logistics Enterprises for the Walton family. The investors remotely came in. We recruited the investors to come, but now the investors have a spotlight. It doesn't matter where the investor was. They have a spotlight on Northwest Arkansas, which doesn't have any clusters. But at least we launched these 25 new companies there to try to continue to build the ecosystem of supply chain innovation in the area. During the course of the challenge, we also connect the companies with talent, as I mentioned, but mentors. So our mentor base is about 600 really fantastic people. You know, so for example, one of the best oncology guys in the U.S. and he always mentors some of our cancer-oriented companies. And so we also continuously evaluate the company based on the items I mentioned previously, the 30 categories, if you will, of capabilities, and also the fluid intelligence test. Because if you have a leader who has a high compassion score, a high openness score, and a low troublemaker score, then they're going to be a pushover. So we have to have strong leadership for the startups. Hopefully that answers the question.
And Emma, yeah, in terms of outcomes, bringing people, the sort of next generation through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's very simple, really. We advertise all of our vacancies on our website. Absolutely every single one of them goes on our website. Our talent acquisition all comes through that. So it's very transparent what opportunities are available. We try extremely hard to make sure that the role descriptions aren't in any way using language that leans towards suggesting that we're looking for a particular, gender. For instance, gender bias in job descriptions is a real problem, and lots of studies have shown that really can put off certain applicants. So we try very hard for that. All of our managers are trained through Recruiting for Growth toolkit, which ensures that we don't have any biases in the selection process, that we evaluate candidates on their own merits, that we have scoring systems which would withstand scrutiny if we were challenged around why we made a certain hiring decision. It's very important for the candidates to know that they're coming into a hiring system that is fair and equal. We have conducted most of our interviews via the telephone, so any of the kind of biases that can be introduced by candidates who have an amount of kind of presence and confidence that sometimes can be imparted because of the advantages that you may have enjoyed as you've been growing up. There's a little bit more of a level playing field with the telephone-based interview systems. And then we use, JDI, judgment, drive, initiative frameworks to help us evaluate the sort of behavior sets. And senior managers, I think, around similar to some of the scoring that Rosemary has mentioned, we use systems like Hogan, as well as capability scoring. So, we really spend a lot of time looking to do a great job of hiring, because as Colleen and others have mentioned on this call, it's number one factor that is propelling our companies forwards.
Yes, and Horst, in Germany, that transition from academia and graduating into the industry, into the companies, how is that supported in Germany? You're on mute, Horst.
There's more support now coming from faculty, from the professors or so. There were days, in the beginning when everything started in the 90s, the established professors did not like that, that the best talent went off to the industry. And then when there was the first financial crisis, 2001 or something like this, then they said, now the spook is over, thanks God, now we can keep our talent with ourselves. but that was not the case. So, but in the meantime, I think they got used to that, and they are proud if their fellows, or if their postdocs or whatever it was, made a career in the industry. That I think has completely changed, and everybody, also the established faculty, wants to be close to the industry in the meantime. It took quite some years, but that's typical for Germany. It takes always a little bit longer, but then it might be stronger. Yeah, and now I think there's a good relationship, and we support each other. We have things brought together. They have realized if they have a good relationship to the industry, they can make money through that. Yeah, so there are very interesting partnerships, research projects that they can do together. They don't have to ask for a grant, but they can write their publication. So that has completely improved.
So I guess I'm conscious of time, but when I was putting the session together, and I was thinking diversity these days we hear in the ED&I type discussions more often than not, but actually there were many diverse things and roles in the life science industry, and the panel here, you kind of exemplify that in the sense of all in life sciences, but all doing very different roles within life sciences, and we need all that jigsaw to work. And actually it is true that if we build it, they will come, the talent will come, and that's key. We've got to build the right things, both in terms of the companies, the environments, and the cultures within all of that, and make it exciting to work in. But if we could finish off, I'm going to come round the panel and think with all that diversity that's there and the opportunity out there, and we're in year 2022, let's go back to, if you were talking to the 22-year-old self, what advice would you give about choosing a location to start building your career? But I'll start with Ted.
Well, one of the things that I added to the list of what makes a biocluster is the quality of life issue. And I think we're seeing that play have a higher rating these days than we have in the past. And because these beautiful young employees are very well educated, and they know what they want. They're laying it out. They're saying, yeah, but I don't want to slave away. I want to have a quality of life, and that might mean living somewhere where you have access to the ocean or the mountains or whatever is your preference. But I think that's what I'm seeing now is that, back in the old days, Tony, as we often said, well, if you do your job well, you get to keep it. That's not the case today, because they are highly mobile, and if they're not getting job satisfaction, they're going to go somewhere else. So it's if the whole dynamic has shifted, and all for the good, I think, all for the good. It makes, if you get that kind of employee base, that makes the company better. So I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be great.
Rosemary, what would you have told a 22-year-old Rosemary?
Oh my gosh, I would have said, party a lot more and drink some tequila, and basically, I when I was in my early 20s, was at Goldman Sachs with 2 to 3 all-nighters a week, every single week for the first probably 20 years of my career, and I was on a plane for 18 straight, out on Sunday and 2 to 3 countries a week, and then back on Friday. So basically, the network component didn't, building a community of people around you didn't exist. I didn't know who my neighbors were. I had a little boy come over who said, can I come into your house? And he was my next door neighbor. I didn't know who he was, but, and I came home early on a Friday, and he told me I'm your neighbor. He said, I just like to check out your house. So I said, okay, just check everything out. Just be careful of the wires. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be in my office over here. And he said, you're normal, but you don't have any kids. I said, nope, I don't. But the house is always dark because, there's nobody there. So, building a network with and having a life, I think it's building on putting a pinpoint on what Ted mentioned, but I would have said that that's the most critical thing you do as a career when you're starting.
Colleen.
Yeah, I think I was always panicked, like, am I going to figure out what I really want to do? And I think I would probably tell myself back then it's going to be okay. And I think I would say, you know, so long as you develop a skill set, you can typically take a skill set and it can cross functional areas. I started out in accounting and finance. I absolutely hate accounting, and that was a really hard job for me. And I'm glad I'm not in it anymore, but all those skills that I learned are very relevant to what I'm doing today. So, you know, just that you know, so long as you have a technical skill set, you can really kind of flex functional areas and build off of it.
Yeah, Horst.
What do I tell young people? Study physics, then you can do everything after that.
True.
And we'll come
I'll
back
try. I'm very close to my retirement. Being over 70, that's okay to retire, but my next goal is to study physics, actually. Then I hopefully can have learned to learn, yeah?
And we'll come back to Cambridge. Emma.
And lastly, me. Yeah, so I was lucky growing up that I was always encouraged to do what I loved, and what I loved was science and chemistry, and that served me very well. And I think the only other advice that I would give would be to kind of trust your gut. And on the comment that Ted made about what young people want, you know, making that holistic decision, you know, that is right, not just for kind of in your career and, you know, how does your salary compare with your contemporaries, but am I going to enjoy living here? Are these people that I have some shared values with? Is this going to be a company that I'm going to look back and be really proud of, you know, having served? And, you know, if you can answer questions like that in the affirmative, then you're on the right track.
Lot to be said of trusting your instincts sometimes, and you do get a feel for whether it's the right place or the right thing to be doing. But I'm going to hand back to Alicia because she's virtually staring at me because I know I'm slipping on timekeeping. But I'd just like to thank the panel, and I'll give you a virtual round of applause. I think thanks for sharing your insights. I think the key to this is we are all different. We do need diversity, but we've got to create the right environments to get it to mix and talk to each other. So thank you all, and back to you, Alicia.
Thank you very much indeed, Tony, and the whole panel. That was fascinating and really valuable to have each of your insights. It's clear that diversity of talent is something which is really key and which reoccurred throughout the discussion, which actually means I just wanted an opportunity to highlight that One Nucleus is running a Building Life Science Adventures Careers Conference. So it's the second one. We had our first last year. It's a digital conference. It harnesses both the expertise of the companies in our network and alongside those who are early career seekers who are looking to get into the sector and in the industry and in exploring all those challenges and questions that need answering. So it's a real opportunity to knit those two sides together. It's free to attend. There are supporter and sponsorship opportunities available for companies who want to align their brand as well. So I'd really encourage everyone to visit the One Nucleus website and check that out. There'll be a conference app too. Very quickly, there was a question on Slido about the best job platforms. Not biased at all, but I'm going to say check out the One Nucleus jobs page where our members can highlight the job vacancies that they have. And very exciting news, we have a new LinkedIn jobs page as well. So I can send out some links for anyone who's interested, but you can find that on the LinkedIn platform. So yep, I think hopefully that answers your question. So with that, just to thank everyone for your time online and those at Norwich as well. Thank you for joining us and enjoy your networking. Now, I hope you have a good time networking. So I'm going to end the session and wish everyone a good evening. Thanks all.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Alicia. Fantastic.
Thanks all. Bye.